Hi everybody, are you tired of Twitter going down the drain like it's been in the past year or two? Where the site just straight up no longer works like it should? Where you have to log in to search or view NSFW art? Where, front ends no longer work on the website? And of course, most importantly, Twitter also now requires you to log in to do anything, and then when you log in you can only view so many tweets a day? Do you just love the direction Twitter's going in? Well, hi, I'm here and I've got an alternative to Twitter and that website going down the tubes. And guess what? Unlike something like Blue Sky, where you have to grovel and beg for an invite code just to get in on the cool kids club everyone's posting on, you don't need a single thing to post here, and it's called the Fediverse. And that's right, you don't need a single invite code or any of that nonsense just to start posting. You can even get started right away with a server in your basement. And that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about. How to run a server in your basement or under your bed or in your closet with the least amount of hardware possible and then run Pleroma on it. Sounds crazy, right? But I'm going to be doing that today, and I'm going to be showing you how to do that. So first off, let's talk about our rationale behind this. So, years ago, I knew lots of cool nerds on Skype and whatnot. I knew lots of cool nerds on Skype and, later Discord and Telegram. I knew lots of cool nerds there. Gotta stay hydrated. So I knew a lot of cool nerds. So back in the day, I used to know a lot of cool nerds on Skype and Discord. Especially Skype, because that was an interesting time on the internet. That's when you'd meet cool nerds from stuff like, groups that would literally just dump your contact list and stuff like that. There were a lot of cool ways to meet people back in the day on the internet, and especially because it was a lot less political than it is now. But anyway, I would meet cool nerds on the internet, and one of the trends and things I liked about them is that they would do what I like to call basement host, or closet host, or even under your bed hosting. So what do I mean by this? Well, what they would do is they would take whatever cheap computer they had and they would install Linux on it, or maybe Windows Server if they wanted to run stuff that needed Windows, and they would use it as a server, sometimes hosting like a little nice web page, sometimes hosting their files, sometimes hosting game servers like Minecraft and Quake and Counter-Strike, and those were popular ones, but there were some like Call of Duty and Halo that I hosted or that others hosted. So a lot of people would host servers like game servers or Mumble servers or TeamSpeak servers in their basement. And they would just use a random computer they had. In fact, when I was desperate, I was even running a Halo server as a background process. Yeah, I was kind of crazy at that time, and finding out how to run my own server was a cool thing. I was like using a Pentium 3, a dual Pentium 3 as a server at one point. Not anymore, but you can get much better hardware from a dump or a thrift store. What do I mean by this? Well, let me show you some examples of hardware that I'm talking about. This is a Dell Weiss DX0Q thin client. 10, 15 bucks on eBay. Maybe less at an e-waste place that does scrap by the pound or just wants these out of here. These are nice systems. They've got an AMD GX415GA, I think that's what they are. It's a quad-core AMD Jaguar-based processor. Runs on a 19-volt power brick, has DVI out, and these things were beasts, okay? They still kind of are. I mean, they're very low wattage, but you can play like Call of Duty Black Ops 2 on the lowest settings on them. You can play Source Engine games on them. You can host servers on them, because this has SATA for the internal storage, by the way. And if you've got an SSD, it'll work. And you can play, you can play some games on here, like older ones. You can run Windows 7, maybe Windows 8, Windows 10 for sure. Windows 8.1 for sure, I meant to say. Windows 10, almost certainly. But Windows 8.1 and Windows 7 work on here along with Windows Server. These aren't bad machines for the purpose. They got gigabit Ethernet. Not bad machines. I mean, I knew somebody who, I gave one of these to somebody, and this person, I don't remember if this person used an Intel Atom thin client I sent them, or or this, but I remember this person was playing like not ITG on this thing, which is basically a fork of Step Mania. Yeah, playing Step Mania on this and playing some other lightweight games hooked up to a TV. Good times. These aren't that bad for the purpose. And these only, the CPU is only 15 watt TDP. Very power efficient. And did I mention the RAM is socketed on this? Here's another example of a computer that I'm talking about. Your average E-Waste Dell Optiplex, found at tons of thrift stores, dumps, abandoned by the side of the road, no matter where you are. That's not a joke. I mean, look, it's a Core 2 Duo. This is a later one. But for a while, you could find these types of computers abandoned by the road or thrown out or, you know, dumped at thrift stores. You still can. But nowadays, you might also find something nicer like an Intel Core i5 or an i7 or even an i3. You might find something like that abandoned by the side of the road these days instead of something like this. And that's why I'm choosing this, because this is probably the oldest computer you'll find abandoned by the side of the road or thrown out. This is probably the nicest one you'll find, period. And these machines are nice, by the way, at least for that. This one had I don't know where this computer was. I think it had school written on it, so it might have been for that. But it's got DisplayPort, eSATA, VGA. We don't need any of that. The onboard graphics are kind of mediocre. But the cool part is it's got Ethernet, USB, and of course we pop it open, because you can pop it open easily. You got a hard drive, and even, what's this, DDR3 RAM, yeah. This has DDR3 RAM, unlike some of the older Core 2 Duos. Along with SATA and an optical drive for installing your OS. And some expansion slots. Of course, a full desktop would be better if you want to do expansion slots, but let's be honest here. This is something you throw under your bed or throw in your closet and forget about because it's quiet and nobody in your house will complain, "Hey, Bill, your computer's on loud!" I mean, you know how normies are. You know how normies are with computers. If they hear just a tiny fan whir, like even something like this system with this old PC with a SATA drive. I mean, not SCSI, not even SATA, it's SCSI. This old beige Pentium Pro with the SCSI drive. You know, even if they heard something like that, "Oh my god, it's loud! Turn your thing off!" Or even just like a fan noise that's like not even loud, but it's like you'll hear, "Oh my god, turn that off now!" Well, with this, you'll hear that because it's an old computer, but with something like this Dell Optiplex, whisper quiet. Very fitting for the purpose. Which is why we're doing this today, and why we're using a Dell Optiplex instead of something else. Like a 1U server, which might be loud, especially if it detects an error like some of these HP servers do, where the second there's an error, they turn the fans on. Crazy how that works. Alright, so let's talk about Pleroma a bit and what it is as well. So Pleroma is a social networking software that we're going to be installing for this video on that Dell Optiplex. Now, Pleroma is free and open source software under the AGPL, which means that if you make modifications that you run on your website, you have to redistribute the source code. It's even more viral than GPL is, but it works for its purpose. And that's what the AGPL is. And so Pleroma is this software that works as a Fediverse instance. So what is a Fediverse instance? Well, let's talk about that now, because I think that's very important to talk about too, and why we're running it. So a Fediverse instance is essentially a server hosting something that it's basically a social media platform that uses the ActivityPub standard to communicate with other social media sites using the same or different software stacks. So while Pleroma is a popular one, there's the even more popular Mastodon, to the point that it's sometimes ActivityPub, which is what Pleroma and the others use to talk to each other. Sometimes it's called the Mastodon Network by the news media, by tech journalists, by tech pundits. They like to call it the Mastodon Network when it's not the Mastodon Network, it's ActivityPub. Or the Fediverse. It's not the Mastodon Network. It's like calling the internet the Google Chrome Network. But for real, Mastodon is one of the most popular social media things using ActivityPub. It's the most popular. And Mastodon is essentially ActivityPub. It's not as easy to host, it needs much more hardware, but you can run it, and it will interlink with a Pleroma server. And the same goes with Misskey, which is written in Node.js and popular in Japan. And Misskey will also communicate with Pleroma. And then there's more that will too. There's Lemmy, which is a Reddit clone, believe it or not. There's PeerTube, which is a YouTube clone. There's PixelFed, which is an Instagram clone. There's all these really cool things that use ActivityPub. It's cool. And it works by using something like email does, where you've got your username and then your address. So my ActivityPub username is @paullicker@bae.st. And I'm going to put a link in the description if you want to follow me. But that is my ActivityPub handle. And what it is it communicates between bae.st, or based as it's called, to another instance such as, how do I put it? Shitposter.club, that's literally the name of it. Or if I want to follow somebody on a domain like the.asbestos.cafe, I can follow them too. I can follow them on a domain like asbestos.cafe anytime I want, without having to make an account on Asbestos Cafe. Or I can follow somebody on awoo.fyi, which is an instance somebody I know runs for furries, and I can follow them on that instance too. And it's a bit more complicated than that, and there's a bunch of other stuff I'm not going to go into detail on this video, but you get the gist of it now. You can essentially run a Fediverse instance and have anybody connect to it. And then without having to make an account, and then you can follow people from your instance, kind of like email, kind of like RSS, kind of like a mix of that. It's really cool stuff, and you should try it out. And that's why I'm here to talk about it. Alright, so we're going to talk about a few more things before we start. The first is what software stack other than Pleroma we're going to be using. And that is, I'm going to be using Ubuntu Server for this. I don't like Ubuntu Server too much, but it's what every VPS provider literally offers. And it's also what you can find literally, how do I put this? You can find Ubuntu Server pretty much anywhere these days. That's not a joke. You can find it on any VPS provider. And even though I don't like how it's going with the Flatpak stuff, you can easily install it. It's very easy to install, and pretty much all the directions on Linux server management these days assume you have Ubuntu. And furthermore, OpenSUSE Leap, I don't even know what they're going to do with 16. That's really vague and up in the air because they don't even know what they're doing. They're trying to move to some new model, but it's not doing too well from what I've heard. And then there's also Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or CentOS, and they're currently blowing themselves up right now by trying to restrict access to the source code. So, whatever, can't really use that. Not a good idea anyway, because it doesn't exactly have Elixir packages, so, which is important for Pleroma. As for why we're using Pleroma instead of Misskey or Mastodon, it's easier to host and it's more lightweight, period. There's also two notable forks of Pleroma that exist. The first is Rebased, and Rebased is developed by #1 vegan in the world, Alex Gleason, as a fork of Pleroma to essentially work better with his Soapbox front end. And what I mean is, it enables additional features in Soapbox if you choose to run it. It also seems to be more optimized, from what I can tell, compared to Pleroma. The problem is, and the big problem with Pleroma and Rebased is that Rebased, it's essentially designed for Soapbox, and what I mean by that is Soapbox is essentially a clone of Twitter in a lot of ways, and it also happens to copy some of Twitter's worst mannerisms too, such as replacing ats and specific mentions with a list of them like Twitter and then hiding it in the reply, and also hiding posts from users that have blocked you, just like Twitter does these days. Rebased will do that, and Pleroma does not, because Pleroma doesn't try to be Twitter. There's also Akoma, and that has a few funny nicknames for it, but Akoma is basically, I would not recommend running Akoma for two major reasons. Well, maybe three. The first is that the developers kind of did it out of spite. It feels like one of those forks, but let's talk about the two big reasons technically. The first big reason technically is that Akoma's developers love to mess with the API and functions, such as they kind of broke or crippled MRFs in one of the updates to own the chuds without saying that. And then the other thing Akoma has done that's very controversial is also how they've also removed features and stuff, which goes back to that, but they've also done stuff like, well, they don't really have any distinguishing feature from Pleroma anymore. Even custom reacts, which was the big feature that people were installing Akoma for, is now in mainline Pleroma and is now in rebased. So that's the thing. It doesn't really have much of a reason to run it anymore unless you're running it because some guy said, "Trust me, bro," on the Fediverse. So I would not recommend running Akoma. But I would, rebased, do you like Alex Gleason, and do you like his design philosophy for software of copying Twitter? If you like that, you'll love rebased. And then there's mainline Pleroma. And while rebased I've seen kind of runs better than mainline Pleroma does at this point, mainline Pleroma is just the stuff everybody's familiar with at this point. So I'm just going to go basic here. You can always move from Pleroma to rebased or Akoma if you really insist on Akoma. So either way, you can do it. So we're just going to start with regular Pleroma for this video and run it on Ubuntu. And we're going to do it on this old Dell computer. So get ready to run Pleroma on this old Windows 7 computer. And we're going to use this as a server. Now, if you want to use like something where it's more reliable, I'd recommend getting a real server instead of this cheap Dell for 10, 20 bucks at a thrift store or e-waste. Or there's also some stuff like, you know, i5, i7 Dells. Those are pretty cheap these days too, like the 9020 or 7020 or 7010 or 9010. Those are pretty cheap these days. I'm serious. Those computers are very cheap. This computer is probably free by the dumpster though, so we're going to be using this. And we're going to start by setting the server up. Alright, so I've got my CD right here, and we're going to put this thing in. We're going to turn the server on. We're actually just our desktop, it's Dell Optiplex. And we're just going to turn it on. We're going to go to F12. Oh yeah, that beep sound reminds me of the one university I went to, and they still had Optiplex 755s or 780s or something. And we were booting and using some, the professor's jank Linux from scratch ISO, because literally that's what he used, was Linux from scratch. Yeah, remember that? Crazy stuff, I tell ya. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to, we're going to check our settings. 8 gigs of RAM. Not bad. It's an E8400, also not too terrible. We're going to change it to RAID HCI. And we're going to go to Smart Reporting. We're going to check our system configuration too to make sure we've got everything set up properly. I would reset the settings if I were you though. I'm pretty sure I know what I had on here. Some very weird operating system that didn't even support, what do you call it? It didn't support, essentially, SATA HCI, so I had to set it to Legacy. So now we're rebooting, and now we're going to go boot into Linux, the CD. Now this is Legacy only for, or well, it's not even UEFI, it's, how do you put it? Don't know why it didn't read that time. But this is BIOS only, it's not UEFI. Which still means that this will work because there's plenty of servers out there that also don't have UEFI, such as the HP G8s. So, now it's booting, and it's going to take some time to load up. And that's because we're loading it from a CD instead of a USB drive. And what's going to happen is it's going to take a while to load the image. And then once it's done loading the image, you will eventually be at a setup screen, and then you can just press enter and give it what it wants, essentially. Pretty fun. But since this takes a while and you don't want to watch me take forever to essentially let the CD boot, I'm just going to stop it here, come back. So some text flashes across the screen, that's what happens, and then it changes the resolution, and what you're getting now are essentially the Windows messages, or well, how do you put it? Your Linux messages, not Windows, because unlike Windows, you get to see what it's doing. So you get the stuff as it loads, and it tells you what it's doing, and if you run into any errors, they're going to pop up here too. But what we can see is that it's essentially booting now, and this takes a while. So you go away and you wait for a while and let it boot. And then it come back and it should be ready to install. And this takes a while because the installer for this version of Ubuntu, which is 2204, it takes a while to load and it wants to install updates and all that fun stuff. So what you got to do is sit back and let it do its magic. And so when it finally boots, you pretty much select your language. You can choose continue without updating. It might want you to update it at first, but I just choose continue without updating just to save time. So layout, we're going to choose Ubuntu server, a network adapter, proxy address. I'm not going to set up the disk as an LVM group. You can if you want, but we're not going to set it up. And so it wants us to use ext4. And so what it's going to do is basically format the whole disk, which is a 160 gig disk, and it's going to be using 149 because, you know, the disk stuff's like that. It's never exactly like the number it says. Done. Continue. And then we basically enter our name and password. And then we just choose a password. Definitely install OpenSSH. You can import an identity if you want. And then we're not going to choose any of these. We're not going to choose any of these because, quite frankly, we don't need these. Even postgre we're just going to get from apt-get. So we're just going to ignore all this stuff for now, because when we install stuff, we'll install it. So ignore all that stuff, because who wants PowerShell? Who needs that? And it's going to install the system, and then when it's done, it's just going to say to reboot. And then you reboot. Alright, so once you've completely let Ubuntu's installer do its thing, you should see install complete. You can just hit reboot now. It'll eject it, and if it's one of those laptop drives like this one is, you don't even need to take the disk out. If it is, take the disk out. But if it's laptop style drive, you can just leave it in, because it's not going to boot from it anyway. So let's talk about it a little bit more real quick while this thing boots. It's going to boot into Linux, and it's going to be real fast booting because literally all you have is a file system and not a lot else to load, not a lot of services. So here's a few things to note first when hosting this server. The first is that you should totally take this server, and plug it into the network. You should plug the server into the network instead of trying to use Wi-Fi. You shouldn't use Wi-Fi to host one of these servers because it's probably going to be really laggy. And the other problem when hosting one of these servers, aside from just plugging it into wired, is a lot simpler. You should put it in a place where you can at least check on it if there's any issues, not just bury it too deep, if you know what I mean. But there we have it. And then all we gotta do is log in, shut the server down, either by typing shutdown-h now, or by pushing the power switch, and then just take the server and put it wherever. And then the next thing you want to do is log in through SSH, which the IP address should be. Once you log in here, you can just type in IP80DR and get the address. It'll also sometimes show it when it's doing the boot, like with Cloud in it. And once it's doing that, then you just have to take the server, log in, once you boot it up, and then we'll start from part 2, where we'll essentially configure the server and install everything that actually runs the server, and then we'll go from there. Now, first off, I'm going to show you how to connect to it once you get the IP. So first off, you're going to get the IP of the server. And in this case, our IP is 192.168.1.47. Sometimes you can type the host name in if you're running Linux, like Pleroma 780. But the IPv4 address is the other important thing, and essentially you want an IPv4 address so that you can remote into the system and connect and start doing your thing. And if you're using a VPS, you should get the IP address as well from the VPS provider, so you can do the same thing. And so you're going to do that. You're going to get your server name, and your IP address. You're going to log in, and then you're going to have some fun. Alright, so now we're on our computer, which can run either Windows or Linux. On Windows, if you have a version before 10 or an older version of 10, such as some old LTSB or LTSC version, you might want to install either MobaXterm or PuTTY. And either one of these will work for our purposes. However, what we're going to be doing is also using the SSH command. And to use that, you just type in SSH, you type in the user, and that's what you do. And this also works on Macs and Linux, and if you're using one of the two, you'll definitely want to do that. So you hit yes, and then you type in your password, and now we're logged in. So the first thing we're going to do is update the server. Now on Ubuntu, it automatically installs security updates, which means it's great because chances are you're going to forget to do that. And thankfully, Ubuntu takes care of it. Of course, it does not install non-security updates, however. So what you're going to do is you're going to do those two commands. And what it does is it downloads all these updates, and then it installs them. And this is the first thing you're going to do to set the server up. You're just going to install all these packages and wait for it to do its thing. And so this takes a few minutes to much less time, depending on if you have a hard disk or an SSD. If you have an SSD, it takes a lot less time. If you have a faster CPU, it takes a lot less time. But this is going to take some time to do and run all the updates. So I'll get back when it's done, and you might have to restart as well once it's done as well. So while it's installing these updates, we're going to go to docs.pleroma.social. And this is essentially the website that tells you how to install it. And we're going to go to Backend, and we're going to go to the guide to install it. Now there's a bunch of installation guides for a few distributions that people in this sphere run. So there's one for Alpine, Arch, Debian, Ubuntu, the BSDs, all three of them. And there's also NixOS, and there's also Unohost, which is some weird host operating system I never heard of. And there's also OTP releases. I do not recommend doing OTP releases because these are very old, by the way. And then there's doing it from source. And the thing with doing it from source is you get the latest version of Pleroma, the latest version, which has a lot of features and a lot of updates that mainline Pleroma, as of now, does not currently have. And that's a problem because there's a lot of cool features you want to run that mainline Pleroma does not have in its latest version. This is just a much newer version of it. So here's our guide, and it's a very simple guide that you could even copy paste half of. But I'm going to show you how you'd set it up if you're doing it in your basement. So the first thing you're going to want to do before any of this as well, while it's updating, is you can either buy a domain. Now a lot of people in this sphere of the Fediverse use Porkbun. A lot of people also use Namecheap as well. But a lot of people use these two. You might want to also use a different one just to avoid having a single point of failure, such as with the whole Epic hack a while back where that domain registrar got hacked because the mean people were using it. So you might want to avoid solely using one domain registrar that everybody else is using, but those are two good suggestions. And if that doesn't work, or if you're just doing it temporarily, you can also go to no IP. I think that's, yeah, noip.com, and you can get yourself a free ddns.net host name, and that's what I'm doing here, and I've already got one. So we're just going to get this ready, and the trick is what you have to do is pull in these dependencies, and preferably the optional ones too. And you're also going to want to install Erlang and Elixir because Pleroma is written in that. And I'd preferably install the optional ones too. And then the trick is you have to make a new user and install the dependencies, compile it, set up the database, which all of this is stuff you can copy and paste. But I'm going to be doing that too because why not? So now that this is fully installed our updates, it's asking us what services we want to restart that are out of date. So we're just going to hit OK. Running kernel seems to be up to date. The processor service microcode seems to be up to date. And so we don't have to reboot. Sometimes you might have to if you're installing from a really old Ubuntu 2204 CD, like the original version, where it might want you to update it. So now we're going to start installing it. So now that we've already done, this stuff, we've already done that stuff, so now it's time to install all of this stuff. So you can even just hit copy and then right click to paste it. Y. And what it's going to do is it's going to install all this stuff. It's going to install GCC, it's going to install this other stuff, and it's going to have that installed. And then you're going to do the same with installing Erlang and Elixir. And if you have an older version of Erlang or Elixir, like say you're on 1804 or 1604, you might have to use backports. Whatever this ASDF, oh god, it's a freaking weird package manager, not one of these again. Good lord. Good lord. Or you just, you just Google Erlang Ubuntu packages and you can get these pre-built packages for the newer ones. Why is all this cookie stuff here? But see, there's repositories for newer versions of. Oh my God, get out of here! There's newer versions of Erlang for Ubuntu and Debian and CentOS, of course, because why not? And it's some old R16 because it's CentOS, and nobody cares about CentOS anymore. But Ubuntu and Debian have these new versions of Erlang and Elixir if your repository is out of date, like you're on 1804 and you don't want to use backports. So there's that, I guess. Now, thankfully, Ubuntu uses Erlang version 24, at least for 2204. However, as you can see, 20004 uses 22, and that might be an issue with Pleroma. I don't know if it still is or not, but it could very well be. And as we can see, Elixir is also version 1.12 on Ubuntu 2204, but they're already at, I think, version 1.14. However, I don't know if they're exactly looking for that version, but we'll find out the hard way. So we're just going to hit OK. I can just reboot that later. So we've got Erlang version 1.12 and Elixir 24. And we're going to find out the hard way if that's going to work or not. So now we're going to install the optional packages. And you just right click to do that. And it has to install a ton of stuff because that's how Linux is with all these dependencies. And then we wait for it to finish as usual. And while we're at it, let's just open up another window. We're going to open up another terminal. And now we're going to start some of this other stuff. We're going to start adding the user for Pleroma. And now we're going to switch over to the Pleroma user. So we're going to copy this, and now we're as the Pleroma user. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this first. Let's do this first. Before we switch users, we got to do this first. Unfortunately, I'm starting to sound like I'm starting to sound, unfortunately, like the one professor at the college I used to go to, where essentially what happened was he would just stumble over his own material and, like, he'd get halfway into doing the wrong thing and be like, oopsies, oopsies, I wasn't supposed to do that. And you were supposed to watch this whole hour-long thing of him just spouting Star Trek references off and stumbling over his own material to get a good course grade. And I think everybody ended up quitting that course for a good reason. God, that college was terrible. But that's what happens when you don't get the scholarship because you knew the right person. So what we're going to do is we're going to now install the dependencies for Pleroma. And I think I'll wait till that finishes because we've already cloned it. We've already cloned it, as you can see. We've got the folders. We've got mix, readme, and as you can see, we've got this. We've got our whole documentation, or well, the readme file for it. So we'll just have to wait for that to finish still. Okay, so now we've fully set this up. We've got all the dependencies, I think, installed. So we're going to start getting the dependencies for itself in Erlang. So we're going to get Erlang's dependencies. And so we're going to tell it, yes, we want to install Hex. And now what it's going to do is it's going to start grabbing all the dependencies that it wants for Pleroma to run. And this takes a different amount of time depending on how much hardware you have in your computer. And now what we're going to do is, now that we've got the dependencies, we're going to generate the configuration. And this actually compiles Pleroma. This step does. It sounds like it just says generate the configuration. No, this is the part that actually builds everything now. And depending on your CPU speed and resources and what CPU you have, it will take a different amount of time. And so this Core 2 Duo isn't too shabby when it comes to doing that. I mean, this is a PC you can find literally dumped at the side of the road these days or abandoned. I've heard stories of friends who have found these at thrift stores really cheap. I've heard people find these abandoned by the side of the road. I've heard of people having them given to them by family members or businesses who are like, hey, you're that guy who knows the thing about the computer. You can have my old computer. You'll do something with it, I know. And now with this, it doesn't have to sit in your basement doing nothing. You can actually have a little bit of fun with it before you repurpose it as a router or something like lots of people do with these servers these days. So now it's basically compiling the whole thing, and this is when our resources go through the roof, seemingly. We've got Beam SMP running. We still have plenty of RAM though, but it is using the CPUs quite a bit, or well, both cores. And this takes some time, but it would probably be much faster if you had a lot more CPU resources, like say how do you put it, a Xeon or something. But you know, you can't complain for free hardware that's quiet, fits under the bed, and doesn't mean, and this thing means you won't have to deal with, hey Bill, your server's loud, your computer's loud, shut that dang thing off, it's waking me up, when they hear just a little bit of noise. And so this thing's pretty quiet for what it is. It's nice. And so it's going to compile. And this takes a while, but when it's done, it's done. Alright, so one of the reasons, again, I'm running this on a Core 2 Duo is because back in the day, when you could find Raspberry Pis cheap, you could find them, you could you could install Pleroma on it. And they pushed installing Pleroma on Raspberry Pis for quite some time. Even the official Pleroma site even straight up said it can run on small devices like a Raspberry Pi. In fact, that's even why I ran it on a Spark server or well workstation used as a server last year just to see how crazy it was. But let's go to Micro Center, and if we search for Raspberry Pi, we can't find them in stock. Period. They are sold out. Sold out. Sold out. We type in Raspberry Pi 4. Sold out, sold out, sold out. They don't have any, period. Which kind of sucks. But you can get plenty of Dell Optiplexes for 20 bucks on eBay. So that's what we're doing here. Right, so now it wants us to put in our domain. And thankfully, I've got a domain right here. I just have to remember what it is. So what I got to do is I'm just going to my router to see what it is. All right, so we've got our domain here. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our domain. We're going to paste it here. And so it's going to first ask the domain, and now I'm going to tell me, it's not going to ask me the name of my instance, so I'm just going to put and it's going to ask me an admin email address. You don't have to put it in, but I could just put anything like, you could just put something like that. And in case, if I had to do email notifications, I would have to set that up, but we're not doing that here. But I would put like an email address for your domain if you set one up. And we're going to set up storing the configuration from the domain, database. So we're going to set yes. Host name's localhost, Pleroma, auto-generated, no, 4000. And we're just going to leave most of this stuff normal. And you can also choose to anonymize the file names of uploads. That's a mixed bag. You might want to do that, but you might not. Like if you're uploading like PDF files or MP3 files, or you like funny file names. You can also deduplicate them to save space, especially if you're running a multi-user instance. I would do that definitely. And so now what we're going to do is, we're done with that. And now it's generated our config file. So we're going to check that with nano. Actually, wrong thing. It didn't copyright. It's unwritable because where's the wrong user? But it saved all that stuff there. Now you're going to want to be very careful with that file I just showed you because that has some salts and configuration keys and all that stuff that you don't want to get leaked out. So be very careful with that config file. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run this command. And we're going to now essentially set this up. We're going to set up the database. And now we've created the database thing. We're going to migrate the database. And now that's migrating. And so that's doing that first. It's compiling that. I think it has to recompile it all the time when you change some stuff. And if you have a really, really slow CPU, like when I was trying to do it on that Spark, it's going to be excruciatingly painful. But thankfully, we've got a Core 2 Duo, which is much, much faster than an old Spark CPU from 2003 or something, so it shouldn't be too bad. There's a few other things I saw in one of the other tutorials I'm trying to remember. Right. This command. FTP-MVO, and if you probe that, you should get JSON output. So first it's generating the Pleroma app, and now it's doing the magic of migrating the database over. And this takes some time depending on if it's your first time installing or you're upgrading or any of that stuff. Now it's migrated. It didn't take too long to do. And now we're going to start Pleroma. And this is essentially what tests it. We're going to quit out of this, htop. And now it's starting up the Pleroma service. And when you run it like this, for now, it just logs it in the output. So now that it's pretty much starting up the endpoint, we're going to type this in. I think you have to do something. Maybe delete the dash. And as we can see, I had to delete M because OpenBSD is a bit different. We've got our JSON output here, see? We've got all this info. So that means that Pleroma is at least running the server part, and that's a good thing. That means that the service is alive. And if I go here, let's let's open up another window. 1.47. I don't think it's going to load because I have to set it up right. I think I have to straight up set it up right or something before it'll even do that. So, but at least we've got it working. So now what our step is, we have to install ng-inks. We're going to kill this. We're going to kill this, abort. Erlang is closed. And we're going to install ng-inx. Yes. Now we're going to install certbot. And certbot is something else you have to install when you're doing one of these instances, so that you can get your encryption certificate. And once this is done, we're going to make the directory, and then we're going to run certbot. And I'm going to stop filming so I can finish this. Now, of course, there's one more very important thing you have to do, by the way, that I forgot to mention before you do the certbot thing. You got to forward TCP port 80 to 192.168.147, or whatever our IP address is for Pleroma. I'm going to forward port 80. And we're going to forward port 443, which is the HTTPS port. We're going to click add there, and now we're going to click save. And that's how you do it on this router. And now that we've got our ports forwarded, we can now try Let's Encrypt. Unfortunately, right now, it seems like I'm going to have to put this project on hold for just an hour or so, because right now, no IP seems to be having an issue where there's delays doing DDNS updates. So right now, my IP address is not properly, it's not essentially propagating. And right now we've got no A or AA records. So it's not working right now. I'm gonna have to wait a little bit for this actually to go through, so it might be a few hours or something, unfortunately. Alright, so great news. I now have the NGINX thing ready to configure after no IP came back up, because no IP came back up and I was able to actually have the DDNS record linked to my IP address. So now that's all done. Let's Encrypt works. Port 80 is open. We've got that all set up. So now what we got to do is copy in the example NGINX configuration. I already did the first part, so we're just going to paste it here. And now we can just let's just double check. And so that's linked there. And so now what we have to do is we now have to edit the configuration for NGINX. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit that file. And it is right now here. It's in the sites available. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to sudo nano And so now what we have to do is we now have to put in our server name. And so what our server name is going to be is, it's going to essentially be pleroma_under_my_bed.ddns.net. And so what we're going to do is we're going to select here. And we're going to paste it here. And so that's our IP address, our name. And now our next thing is we're going to take out example.tld. And we're going to paste that here too. And we're going to just do that with, every example.tld. And we're just going to replace it. And so we're just going to double check everything to make sure it's good. We don't have any more example TLDs, it seems. There we go. So we're just going to Control O, Control X, and now we're going to make the server, essentially. First, we're going to start NGINX. And then while that does that, we're going to copy the systemd service. And now we're just going to start the Pleroma service. Let's double check this. So first off, we're going to run htop. And now we're going to start this. And so as you can see, the CPU usage is going through the roof. And if we look at what it's doing, it's running verilib Pleroma. We can see it's really running Pleroma right now. And now let's double check. Woo! It works. Pleroma is now working on our Dell Optiplex. So now we have to make our first user. And so now what we have to do is we have to paste this in, sudo hu pleroma to switch over to Pleroma user, pleroma.user new, and then you're going to put in your username, your email address, and dash dash admin. And that's what we're going to have to do. Yeah, it does that. So we're just going to do that. And so we're going to make a username and get that set up. Now, by the way, real quick, if you do this, you have to do it in one that's in the opt-Pleroma directory. You can't just do it in your root directory, or you'll get a nasty red error message. So keep that in mind while you do this, and you have to do that. You have to have it in the opt-Pleroma directory, and if you aren't sure where you're at, type pwd in, and it should say it, opt-Pleroma. Alright, so once you have done that, once you've put in an email address and a username, it's going to ask you to essentially confirm everything, and then it will generate a password reset token URL, and you're going to get this URL that it gives you in the command line. You are going to paste that into a new Firefox tab, and then it's going to ask you to generate a password. I am not going to use the password Firefox is generating because it's already giving me one that anybody can see, so we're not going to use that password. Instead, I'm going to just use a password generator and come up with my own. So once you enter the password in, it'll say password changed. You can then go to your home page and now just come up with, you just got to log in. And as you can see, the known network is currently 100% empty because right now there is nothing to have there. So we're going to click login, update. And it might take a while. In fact, we're going to go to htop. And logging in always seems to take the longest. And so now we are at our Pleroma main menu, and this is where the fun really begins. So on a typical Pleroma install out of the box, it's going to be bare. You're going to have nothing. You're going to have nothing in your public timeline, no network, bookmarks, nothing. You have a completely 100% empty instance. Now when you click this icon, you get admin FE. Now these other icons are stuff like preferences for your user, customize your profile here, and security stuff, auth tokens. If you want to move or delete your account to another instances, you can mute word filter stuff, presets, themes, all that cool stuff, import, export, and of course your version of Pleroma 2. Me to log in. Can't even look at that. Okay, we're going to go to administration. And it logs you in via Pleroma FE by default. If you're using rebased, it's not going to. But it's going to be /Pleroma/admin. And that's the username for admin FE. So we can see our user ID here. We can see if we want to, how we want to Janny our users by doing stuff like forcing posts to be NSFW or not having media or unlisted or followers only, or disallow following from remote users or at all, get password reset tokens. You can do all this stuff there, and you can change everything for users here. The most important ones are going to be, first of all, relays. Now every Pleroma instance by default has a relay, and the same goes with rebased. Every rebased instance by default is a relay. Akoma does not do this because Akoma does a lot of dodgy stuff like that. And one such thing that it does is by default, it doesn't run the relay. While Pleroma, on the other hand, is designed so that you could essentially run it on a Raspberry Pi or in your basement or without having to follow many people. And so you can add relays. Now, relays are somewhat have a mixed bag among some people. Sometimes you'll run into relay operators, they'll remove you if you don't suck their code of conduct. And then you also have essentially others, like the guy who runs FSE, saying, I don't run relays anymore because how I like to do it is users will follow people and people they like will essentially populate the timeline. Of course, as we all know, the whole known network is essentially a minefield. It's like you never know what you're going to get when you click that. We've also got setting up stuff like media proxy cache, which we don't have right now, but you can set that up to cache objects. If you're running a single user instance, it can be kind of risky, and even then you kind of have to ban certain instances from it in case stuff that's illegal in your jurisdiction comes up, for example. So we've got settings for HTTP, Gopher, because it's got a Gopher front end for some reason. We've got stuff like emojis, emoji packs, importing them from elsewhere. We've got upload settings, but the most important one is going to be the MRF tab, because you can do stuff like block out instances or restrict health threads, which are like really long threads with tons of people tagged in them. Or you can block out, how do you put it? You can restrict certain words if certain words bother you, or certain words are illegal to say in whatever country you're in. We've got activity pub, authentication, that sort of stuff. There's a whole lot of settings, but the other most important one is instance. I know I'm just glossing over it, but right now we've got our instance name, our description, and we can set our character limit to something like. I was actually telling a normie about this. I was telling him that, hey, you can do this thing where you can actually use a WordPress blog as a Fediverse thing. Of course, they didn't care because they're not, Fediverse users, or they don't really care for that. But yes, you can actually get a WordPress activity pub plugin. So that's why there's like high word limits too, is stuff like that. And so we're going to turn off registrations open. Very, very important, especially if you don't have activation required. You also should have account approval on if you want to filter out some people. There's also invites enabled. You definitely don't want to turn this off unless you're Andrew Torba and you're trying to run Gab 2 or something. Allow relay is very important because it'll definitely increase visibility to your instance. Quarantined instances. You can do that for, say, certain instances will reject MRFs for, say, DMs or followers only. They'll turn them into public posts. So you can quarantine them if that's the case. Certain ones will do that. User bio length, user name length. You can set a lot of settings like this. It's really, really cool. And of course, you can also choose an instance thumbnail. You can choose backup codes, do all this cool stuff. It's very, very, very advanced. Got timelines. You definitely want to check these. I'm definitely going to check all three of these. Well, at least these two. You should totally do this, and especially if you're using a really sensor-happy VPO host like AWS, you'll definitely want to turn on disallowing viewing remote and local statuses, and turn on every privacy option. Or maybe if you're really paranoid, run it without a front end. But of course, the thing is you should probably use a better VPS host if that's the case. And so you can add welcome messages, chat messages, emails. It's really nice. You have so many options of stuff you can change with Pleroma. It's a very flexible social media stack, and it's really nice to run. So now it's time to do a few things. We're going to customize our profile. We're going to put some stuff in. So you can put that in, put an avatar and profile banner. I'll go grab an avatar off Google Images real quick. And so now that we've done that, we're going to click Save Changes. And you have to click Save Changes. It's in a weird spot. It's not at the bottom like you'd expect. It's over there. And that's one of the things I don't like about Pleroma. They have so many weird Save Changes spots. It's a bit confusing. It really is. So now we're going to go and look for some people to follow. I'm going to follow my other account here, and I should add an @ so that it links to that. Save changes. So now we're going to click this, and it doesn't actually load it up. We actually have to go to search, type in the username, and then click on their profile. And that's how you discover profiles on Pleroma. Now you're going to click follow. And it says request sent. Let's refresh it. And as we can see, we are actually federating 100%. Let's follow a few other people. Let's follow this person. And you'll notice something, by the way, too. You will notice that the only posts on here are pinned messages. No more statuses. That's all it's going to fetch. 2 statuses. But if we click this icon here, this arrow, you are actually going to see his full profile. Followers and following are hidden. And then it says only says statuses 2. If we go over here, we have statuses 111521. And we can just scroll through just all these posts of anime girls. So see, that's the difference. You can see all these posts on Shitposter Club, and see, look, he followed me too. We're starting to get federation here. In fact, I'm even going to make a post here. And I'm just typing. Sorry, I'm just in the zone right now, typing. And you know what? I'm going to even take a screenshot of this in a second too. Actually, I will in a second, but yeah. I just made a post here finally. And as you can see, I now have a post there. And if I go to timelines and I go to no network, there's still not going to be a lot yet. I'm going to have to follow more people. Or what I can do is go back to admin FE. And what I can do is I can go to relays, and we're going to add a few. And that's not going to work. What we have to do is we have to add something here. We have to go to the Pleroma relay, and what we have to do is follow it. And unfortunately, look at this allow list cancer. That is not cool. That's against the spirit of the Fediverse. So what we're going to do is we're going to use actor instead of inbox. So what we're going to do is, and we're going to, it's also not going to work. There's a certain way of doing it. I just have to figure out how. It's been a while since I've done this. Alright, so it seems like a lot of stuff when it comes to Pleroma documentation in general is a little bit dodgy, so you're not going to use actor, you're going to use /relay. So what we're going to do is we're going to just add HTTPS and you're going to add the domain. It's got to be a Pleroma or a Pleroma or rebase domain /relay, and it has to be enabled. So for example, post won't work because it does not have that enabled. And we're going to add a few more. I'm trying to remember what other big instances there are, but there's a lot of them. And so what you're going to do is you're going to add any instance you like with people you like on it, and you're just going to add /relay to it. Here's another instance that I like that is on Pleroma and it's open. And here's an instance a friend runs that's for furries using modified rebased. Let's see if that's open. And let's click relays. And so right here, moderation log, It says that we followed relays. And so now what you're going to do is take a look at the whole known network, reload it. And you have posts now that are coming up from anything that it interfaces with, such as other instances, any post that it knows about, and we are getting flame wars in. And we're getting lots of crazy flame wars here from different instances. And that's popping up. And also, when I make a post about any post here, it's going to show up as well. And so there we go. And so if you want people to follow you, what people are going to have to do is link at purplecat at Pleroma under my bed .ddns.net, and that's going to be my ID that you'll have to follow. So I'm probably going to leave this up for like maybe a month or two, and then I'll take it down. But that's how you do it. And so there's a lot of other things that I would suggest you doing if you were to make a multi-user instance. Aside from setting up email, the first thing I would do is set up a reverse proxy. If you don't know what that is, look up what a reverse proxy is. And you're going to want to do that to mask your home IP address or whatever other IP address you're having so that, nothing happens. The second thing you're going to want to do, and this is also important, is you are also going to have to want to use better hardware instead of just an old Dell with only a single hard disk. You do not want to host your instance with a non-rated hard disk array, or at least some other way of copying data over, like soft RAID or hardware RAID or whatever. However you want to do it. You do not want to have no way of backing up your data. And you're going to want to make backups. You're going to want to do all that stuff. Basically, do your typical website administration. And most importantly, don't let random people send you Minecraft mods and telling you, hey, download my Minecraft mod, because that's how one instance got hacked. Another time, recently, somebody had their instance essentially hijacked by, well, they didn't even have that. They had the police raid them for throwing Molotov cocktails at police officers. And what happened was they had a backup of their instance data on the hard disk, and the police took it unencrypted. I mean, I'm not saying that you should totally. I'm straight up saying that you should not be dumb enough to go out and commit crimes while running an instance. I'm saying you should not do that 100%. But what I am saying is also you should, treat your data security well, because, it might not be police officers stealing it. It could be anybody stealing your backups if they're unencrypted. So encrypt that stuff and be very careful about your data if you run an instance. And definitely, if you're going to shut it down, tell people ahead of time. And there's a lot more I could talk about, but get in touch with me if you need any help. I mean, my ID is paulicker@based. So follow me on there. Follow me on there if you want to know. If you want to know stuff about running Pleroma, and there's other people I could refer you to too. So have at it. Have fun running a Pleroma server. And we're already getting stuff. So thanks for watching. Subscribe for more, and please totally run a Pleroma server. It is fun. It's worth it. You'll love it, guaranteed.